Hello and welcome to the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties Current Affairs podcast focusing on Central Asia. I'm Muhammad Tahir, the host of the Majlis podcast and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties Media Manager for South and Central Asia here in Washington, D.C. The global death toll from the coronavirus has exceeded 24,000, with more than 500,000 people infected and counting. Now, the United States surpassed China in terms of number of cases confirmed. But China is the country where all this crisis started. And after China, Iran was the next major hotspot. And Central Asia finds itself in the middle of these two coronavirus hotspot countries. So we thought it's important that in today's Majlis podcast, we do a quick reality check on how the region is coping with it. What has been some of the visible impacts of the pandemic and what are the authorities doing about it? To discuss all these, I'm joined by Nikita Makarenko, correspondent of the local newspaper Gazeta Uz in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, Shirin Aytmatova, leader of the Umut 2020 People's Movement and formerly a member of the Kyrgyz parliament, joining us from Bishkek, Aygerim Tolyukhan, correspondent for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties Kazakh service, Radio Azadtik, who's joining us from Almaty, Kazakhstan, Bruce Pannier, the editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owazi. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us today. So let's divide the conversation into two episodes today. First, to talk about the impact, and then later we will get into the policy responses and questions like what is working and what is not working. So starting with Kazakhstan, Aygerim, the country with the largest border with China and arguably the hardest hit country in Central Asia. What is the latest from there?
Just about 10 minutes ago, we have confirmed 11 more cases, 9 in Nur Sultan and 2 in Almaty, overall 137 cases. And almost the whole Kazakhstan, there are around 7-8 regions, 4 cities. 3 people have recovered, 1 person died, and we don't know all the details of the person who died because this person hasn't traveled outside of Kazakhstan, and authorities told us that she was actually traveling inside the country a lot, attending some guest meetings and seeing her relatives, and it was a 64-year-old woman who died, I think, yesterday morning.
And of course, any number we are going to give today will certainly change by the time we will post this podcast. We are taping it today, which is Friday, and this is planned to be published on Sunday. So, Shirin, Kyrgyzstan has seen a huge jump today with 14 new cases. Now a number of confirmed cases there stands at 58 and counting. So Kyrgyzstan also started talking about it very late, but I was told that you and your colleagues were raising red flags way ahead. Tell us about the evolution of Kyrgyzstan coming to this point.
In Kyrgyzstan, for now, we have 58 official confirmed cases of coronavirus. However, this is questionable because so far, the government has not released information that would state how many people in total have been tested for coronavirus, since this could, reflect completely different, scenarios of what's going on in our country.
What
kind
of scenarios are you talking about, Shirin?
Well, if considering that, let's say, out of 1,000 tested people, or 1,000 tested citizens, we had only 15 cases. This is one look at what's going on. But in case the testing of citizens was minimal, let's say only 100 or 200 were tested, then this completely changes the picture. And so far, the citizens of Kyrgyzstan and Umut 2020, the People's Movement, we have been demanding for the government to raise transparency, because this kind of information shouldn't be kept in secret, as it will affect everyone. So far, we have not had any deaths, and I guess it wouldn't be realistic to expect this, to continue. But more importantly, we have a very weak public health system, and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has decided to help Kyrgyzstan, and they're giving, I think, $120 million to support Kyrgyzstan and improve the situation with the coronavirus here.
Yeah. Shirin, I don't know if you mentioned that. How many people so far tested in Kyrgyzstan? Any figure on that?
Well, this is the whole question, that however many times the government has been asked to release this information, it's being kept secret from the people. So we have really no idea until we find out how many people have been tested, because for a long time there weren't enough test kits, and there was divergent information on how many test kits exactly we have right now that the government possesses.
That kind of raises question about the entire region in terms of the capacity of health sector to respond to this crisis. Let's go to Uzbekistan. Nikita, Uzbekistan has seen its first death due to coronavirus. In total of 83 confirmed cases are reported as we speak. What has been the visible impact of this disease to day-to-day routine in the country?
Yeah, so talking about cases, I have an update which came just 9 minutes ago, and so far we have 88 cases confirmed and one death in Namangan of a very old lady who just came from Saudi Arabia. So far, I'm really happy about really strict measures which our government implements. And just a few hours ago, we completely stopped all the transportation between cities and between regions. And in Tashkent, we can't gather more than 3 on the street and in public anymore. And actually, we can't leave the home without any other reason than to buy medicine and goods, food, I mean. And it's I appreciate it, because we really need to stop it quickly, and our people in Uzbekistan are not the most responsible people at all. Anyway, it doesn't matter that we have a strict fine for people who don't wear masks in public. People still don't wear it, and they walk everywhere in big groups. They don't wear masks, so it's irresponsible. So far we're moving to a very strict Chinese way of a quarantine, and it's good because it's progressing. It's like 10, 20 more cases every day, and it will speed up.
What about the other gathering places like weddings, mosques? Are they still operating?
No, the new rules being established just a few hours ago. It's completely new rules, so no one could gather in a group more than 3 people anymore. Doesn't matter what's going on.
That includes like mosques, churches, or any other gathering places?
It includes everything, even in a car. Everything, doesn't matter.
That also presents very, very different picture when compared to Tajikistan, Bruce. I don't know what's happening in Turkmenistan. Let me bring in Bruce here. Bruce, it looks like they don't care about it. What's going on?
The situation there is almost exactly the opposite of everything we've heard from Nikita, Agarim, and Shirin. They are acting like there's absolutely no problem, and that it can't affect them in any way at all. There's endless comments about how irresponsible this is. They're holding mass gatherings. They had banned people from going to Friday prayers until last Friday, when all of a sudden they decided they were going to lift that because the Nowruz holiday was coming up, I guess, and they were going to have these big celebrations anyway. They didn't want to scare anybody off. But when you look around the world and look at the different images that we have from places on every continent, and then look at pictures coming out of Tajikistan, it's like it's impossible to understand exactly what the logic is there. They're surrounded by countries that have it, and their people are moving around. They have migrant laborers who've been moving around, and we know that once the virus started to spread around, some migrant laborers who were in Russia, among other places, decided that was the time they were going to come home. So there almost surely is someone there who has been exposed to this and probably is a carrier. And yet the Tajik government and authorities there carry on as if there was absolutely no problem, and that there could not be a problem for them. It's very disturbing.
Bruce, I thought the reason why they are having this light hand on this could be because they don't want to have any negative news before the Nowruz celebrations. Maybe I could be wrong about that. But now that Nowruz celebrations passed, still you don't see anything coming out of Tajikistan in terms of any measures, anything like that?
No, in fact, just the opposite. There's still images, Rustam Momali, President Rahman's son, was just elected to the Senate, and there was pictures showing him in big crowds of people. Some pictures of the president out there with young people, shaking hands. It's like the virus doesn't exist at all for them.
Interesting.
It's like I said, it's impossible to explain what the logic is there.
Well, Shirin, you as a former politician and also health activist, how we should make sense of what is happening in Tajikistan? The way they behave in corona times throwing big parties and just, ignoring what's going on beyond their borders.
Kyrgyzstan was similar in their attitude towards the pandemic until the first few cases. And then things started developing very quickly. We had a curfew that was put on. People have to be home by 8 p.m. and this lasts until 7 a.m. in the morning. And people need special ID cards that need to be given out so that they can go to work if it's kind of essential. And then actually, I think that until the society at large comes to an understanding that this is imminent and it's not going to go away and it's happening everywhere else in the world, I think until then, people would like to take these horrifying things lightheartedly to, make less of them than it really is. But I think in reality, when first cases start, being announced, I think this is when the mentality changes and the attitude of the people changes. And also the government, then they can't lie.
Then should we expect that there is no case in Tajikistan? Is it that possible?
Well, as I have told many times to my colleagues and to the people in the government, I think that until you do exhaustive testing, you can't really say you have no coronavirus cases in your country. It all depends on how many tests have been done. And this is the case in Kyrgyzstan too. I mean, the longer you hold off, the longer you are coronavirus free, supposedly. But even before these things were happening, there were deaths that were being registered as pneumonia related.
Yeah.
So to see the true scope of what's going on, you really have to dig deep. And in countries with low levels of democracy and little transparency, these things take some time.
Right. Aigerim, Kazakhstan has started reporting about cases, although it was very slow, but they started earlier than any other country in Central Asia. Now they have some level of experience that they could talk about. They could base their progress or lack thereof. How the testing was going on in Kazakhstan and how their health sector was responding to this crisis?
So far, just yesterday, the representative of the Ministry of Healthcare, Lyudmila Birobekova, told Kazakhstanis that they can actually test if they pay money for that, for express tests that were bought from the sponsorship money. She didn't clarify who was the sponsor, but it is around 200,000 express tests that will be available in the beginning of April. And she said that Kazakhstanis who are eligible for free testing are those who are in socially vulnerable groups, also those who are elderly people, those who contacted the infected people, and those who are under 18 years old, and others. And those who just want to check if they have coronavirus, they can go to the private laboratories and get this test. But she actually clarified that people who sit home and who have not been abroad for the last 14 days, it's useless because this express test is actually just showing the antibodies, and it can show only if the person is very sick, like the concentration of the coronavirus is very high in the person's body, or if this person has already recovered from the disease. So it's she said it's useless to check just in case if you have this virus. And also from tomorrow on, we will have a very strict quarantine in Almaty, and the capital. The people won't be allowed to leave their homes without giving specific reasons now. And these 3 reasons are buying food, going to work, and something else.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Let me follow up on the restrictions with Bruce. This is one thing, Bruce, that the authorities try to enforce necessary measures or try to regulate day-to-day life of people in a way that can help to curb the spread of this disease further. But on the other hand, you see this constant struggle that people don't trust what the authorities say and don't listen on what they say. The other day, I was having a similar conversation with the South Asian folks from Pakistan and Afghanistan. A Pakistani doctor mentioned a very very interesting case in which a person comes from Saudi Arabia with a visible sign of the virus, but he dodges the security personnel and goes to his village. You know, in Muslim country, when someone comes from Hajj, Umrah, or visiting holy places in Saudi Arabia, people welcome him or her with a wedding-like reception. I heard a similar thing has happened a couple of days ago in southern Kyrgyzstan. So how to handle this situation? Maybe authorities are not the right messenger here. You have seen in Iran, for example, no one would listen to the authorities, and that's how things kind of reached to the point where it is today. So what's the right approach here to spread the awareness about this threat?
You know, it's a process. It wasn't really clear what you were supposed to do, a month ago, even in a lot of these places. And so there have been people, certainly all the nationals of these countries, or many of them, wanted to return and be home when it became clear that this was spreading fairly quickly. And there were stories about people arriving at airports and either not being tested at all, or it was very cursory testing, or even some that later had tested positive but were somehow able to get out of the airport. And, it happened in Uzbekistan and it happened in Kyrgyzstan, and they actually got all the way home before someone finally, either because they showed symptoms or someone back at the arrival point had realized that they had gotten out and somebody needed to check on them. It's getting better as it goes along. And, really it would be unfair to pick on just the Central Asian countries. A lot of countries had the same problem.
Sure, I was just talking about South Asia just a minute ago. But what I'm saying is the guy who escaped the airport in Pakistan and threw a large party in his village, he put all the village in trouble. Now the entire village is under quarantine, and no one knows how many people are infected. Nikita, earlier you were talking about people coming back from Saudi Arabia and infecting possibly lots of an unknown quantity of people in Uzbekistan. It looks like this is a major issue in the region. So this in mind, how much of a trust we should have on the numbers that the authorities are giving us? I mean, how do we know that even they know the number of people walking with the virus in the country?
So at first I wanted just to add to this question about coming back from Saudi Arabia, because the president, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, has been talking literally about this yesterday. The only death from these cases is related to this. So the old lady who returned from Umrah, she organized a big party for 120 people, not the party, but event. And many people got infected probably. And President was talking about this case. And so people still try to organize weddings, but the government shut down it quickly, and there are a lot of cases when it happens. So in general, people are irresponsible, but every day there are like few hundred fines for people who don't wear masks. So government really strictly tries to fight with this. And every day we have this Orwellian experience when police cars, they are driving around the blocks with speakers, they talking, persuading people to sit in the home. So, and your question is very right. The measures which governments try to implement are right measures, and I support it. But the question is how people will follow it and how people will react it. So yesterday I've seen many people on the street unmasked. Today too. Anyway, the fine is quite big, $115 for walking without the mask. But people still do. And it's a big question, will we be successful to implement this or not?
So in that case, Nikita, are we even sure that how many people are there walking with symptoms and spreading this virus? I mean, you give the example of the guy coming back from Saudi Arabia and throwing a party or the reception for that. How can we be sure that there are only these cases and there are not more than that?
We can't be sure, but I could say, I'm a journalist and I'm really skeptical, and I'm not the pro-governmental journalist. I work for independent media. But from the very beginning, I know from my sources that the government been really honest with cases. And we have a unique experience. That's what we call a media headquarters. All the journalists and the bloggers, we are united, and we have this famous Telegram channel, coronavirus.info, who has 1 million subscribers right now. And we try to provide really open and honest information on all the cases, and the government provided. So we inform the people. So I have my sources, and so far the numbers they quite honest. But the question is, it is 14-day period, and we don't know who are infected right now because they don't have symptoms right now. Right. So maybe in next 7-10 days, and I believe we will have a burst of cases.
That is very interesting. And that's the next question I was thinking about. Maybe, Shirin, you could jump in here. Bruce, feel free if you want, or I agree. So China is saying that it is under control, but all that we know is what the authorities are saying. And the authorities there are the ones who complicated this situation in the first place. However, elsewhere, including in Central Asia, as just Nikita said, it is on the rise. So speaking of Central Asia, at what stage are we in this pandemic? Are we at the beginning, the middle, or towards the end? How do you see it? Let's start with you, Shirin.
I think we are at the very, very beginning. And for now, it's very difficult to say what's going to happen. But we too got our first cases from pilgrims coming back from Umrah. So, and they too, through kind of large parties where, the infection was spread further, even though I think by now everyone in the world knows that asymptomatic people can be carriers of the virus and can infect other people. In Kyrgyzstan, from what I see right now, there's a lot of confusion with the curfew and all these different kind of ways that, the government is trying to manage to contain the people inside their homes and not outside. So we'll see how it goes and whether this kind of curfew system is going to actually help with lowering the potential numbers of the infected. In Kyrgyzstan, we also have quarantine where those who arrive at the airport, that they kept there for 14 days and tested for coronavirus. And this also has become a kind of interesting question because some passengers from business class have disappeared from quarantine facilities. And this too shows that, coronavirus, like in many other countries, is separating and dividing the country into like the rich and the poor. And with a country with very limited number of medical equipment to support like the really sick and the emergency rooms, this is going to be an issue. So I believe that this is just like the very beginning, although the beginning is already showing all these different discrepancies. Like we have a lot of political prisoners in prisons right now, and no one is trying to, release them even temporarily for house arrest. And moreover, while all of these, kind of fearful things are going on related to the coronavirus, we have the police that, go and talk with people who write in, social media about coronavirus, and they urge them to stop writing, or they try to scare them. So we also have this kind of Chinese kind of attitude where you try to basically release as little information as possible.
That kind of brings me to a very critical dilemma that journalists are facing these days in Kazakhstan and the other Central Asian countries. On one hand, you can't really avoid reporting about this huge developing story. On the other hand, when you do, you could be accused of spreading panic and get in trouble. So maybe, Bruce, as a journalist, it's our responsibility to report it objectively with all the sources, and there are not many sources there. And the government is the only authority speaking about it. Whoever they think are not writing their line of story, you can be accused. So how journalists are walking on this fine line there? I mean,
boy, there's been endless discussions at RFARL about this in the last 3 weeks. Yeah, obviously, there, especially during a time like this, you really need to get information out to the public. You don't want to spread unfounded rumors. On the other hand, we know what kind of governments we're dealing with out there. And even though they seem to have been, at least in the case of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, a little more open than usual, and they are talking about it, which is a hopeful sign. None of the governments are incredibly popular out there. There's definitely a level of discontent in some segments of society in all these places. So one could understand that it's not in their interest. If it is bad, chances are they probably wouldn't be telling you how bad it really was. So this is a big problem. Now we know that not just in China's case, we all know about the doctor who came forward and said, and put on social networks that there was this disease right at the very start of it, and ended up being detained and having to take down all those messages. But Igarim would know better. There's a doctor in Kazakhstan that did the same thing a few weeks ago and was also detained for spreading these kind of rumors. Now, as a journalist, like I said, you don't want to alarm the public. On the other hand, you don't want them to be missing out on information that's really important to them. So you kind of have to, I don't know, a lot of it's your experience and your instincts. But if you have credible information that there's an outbreak somewhere, it's kind of your obligation to say this one area apparently is having some kind of a severe problem. Officials haven't commented on it yet. It's like you said, you're walking a tightrope with this one. There's no doubt about it. But I can't see how you can conceal that information, with good conscience. If you have reason to believe it's true, there's credible information, there's a problem in some part of the country, the officials are not giving you the whole story, then you pretty much have to go after that and report that as best you can without putting yourself way out on a limb.
Now that corona has become a serious global pandemic, authorities in advanced countries like here in America, where I am, are also struggling to find an adequate and comprehensive response to face this challenge. So what has been some of the policy responses by the authorities, and what does the policy responses tell us about what is coming next? Let's continue the Majlis podcast talking about these and many other questions very shortly. First, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis podcast, I'm joined by Nikita Makarenko, correspondent of the local newspaper Gazeta Uz in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Shirin Aitmatova, leader of the Umut 2020 People's Movement. Shirin was formerly member of the Kyrgyz parliament. She's joining us from Bishkek. Igrim Tolikhan, correspondent for Radio Free Europe Liberties Kazakh service, Radio Azattik. Igrim is joining us from Almaty, Kazakhstan today, and Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe Liberties Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owazi. I am Muhammad Tahir, Radio Free Europe Liberties Media Manager for South and Central Asia here in Washington, D.C., and we are discussing the impact of COVID-19 and the policy response by the authorities in Central Asia against it. So I think we are getting way over time, but let's discuss a couple of policy questions here. So with whom to start? Maybe, Shirin, you are the most policy person here. Given the size and scope of the pandemic in the region so far, and we don't know the full picture yet, the type of responses the authorities have given to this, what does it tell you? Are they aware about the seriousness of this issue? Are they focusing on a right direction?
I think that in Kyrgyzstan, the government is doing the right thing in terms of kind of strict curfew and getting people to, take social distancing seriously. However, there are some moments and, how do I say it? The announcement that we already have cases of COVID-19 in Kyrgyzstan, the announcement was released only after the curfew was introduced. Even though most people suspect that the government knew about them earlier than the curfew. So the curfew was a means to regulate the situation that was considered only after the first cases. So it wasn't a preemptive measure by any means. However, things are developing rapidly, but, certain things are not very well thought through or well organized. Like, in Bishkek, people are detained if they are past curfew on the street. And then they're all brought into one big room, and who knows who is infected and who is not, and they can, infect each other sitting in the room.
Right.
So, these kinds of small things, they're off. But I think as time goes on and we get used to this new, way of living, new reality, really, we will see that, the government kind of tries to address these issues and, improve these little things. But overall, I think the fact that Kyrgyzstan has managing the situation. I think this is also a good sign. However, again, we have most of the funds that the IMF is giving Kyrgyzstan is not going to go directly to the Ministry of Health or fighting the coronavirus. And volunteers, especially our compatriots in Europe and the United States, they're collecting money and fundraising to buy masks and goggles to our doctors, even though Kyrgyzstan was given money by international institutions. I think, the initiative is right and it's serious. However, the implementation lacks kind of being, logic behind it.
Okay. Igrim, the people that you talk to, what are their opinion about this, the policy responses so far, whether the authorities are focused on right direction, whether they are investing in a right direction? Shireen was also saying that they are more usually
I
right.
haven't discussed with people directly about government policies regarding this outbreak, but in general, I think that overall people do support the actions of the government in terms of containing the virus. And most importantly, we had some restrictions even before the virus was first detected. And nowadays, we had the news that while the whole country is in an emergency situation and all the entertainment centers and shopping malls were not working, in other parts of Kazakhstan that are not like the epicenters of the outbreak, like the capital in Almaty, the authorities actually announced that the shopping centers will work because there are many people who will stay unemployed if they don't work. And this news actually caused some anger among people, at least in social media, because they were saying that here is like the outbreak of coronavirus, but we're opening our shopping malls again. So this was the sentiment. But overall, I think also the government is doing the right steps to try to prevent the spreading of the virus and trying to make people stay at home. And of course, as Bruce mentioned, there is a big problem with access to information. Because, for example, in Kazakhstan, journalists are not allowed to attend briefings from the Ministry of Healthcare now. They are only online, and there are some journalists that can submit questions, but so far we still don't know how to submit the questions to the government while they're doing these briefings. And some journalists did actually complain that the questions they asked were not asked during the briefing. So, and we also have some restrictions with filming inside the hospitals. For example, it's prohibited to do any photos or videos. And there was a lot of attention yesterday regarding the 2 people who have recovered from the coronavirus disease. And there were a lot of journalists who wanted to talk to these people, but the authorities said it's a medical secret. And if they would want, they will go and speak to journalists. And also I wanted to mention about the first cases of coronavirus in Kazakhstan, because unlike in Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, the first people who brought coronavirus to Kazakhstan were people on private business jets, like 12 people. And today, actually, the anti-corruption agency announced that they will start some kind of light investigation into who ordered this business jet, because there was information that there were relatives of the high-profile court representative in the capital who contracted the virus and is in Germany.
Yeah, Igrim speaks briefly and she hits lots of headlines. Bruce, let me also get your thoughts on that. The blame game there. The authorities, as Igrim said, they think that some of those virus-affected people might have come from the West, from Germany in this case, while China and Iran is next door. There is any calculated messaging there? What's the truth behind this?
I've been wondering about that since the start. When cases started to pop up all around the world, it was just, let's remember, until Kazakhstan announced that they had 2 cases exactly 2 weeks ago today, there was no cases announced in Central Asia anywhere. And it seemed impossible when you looked at the map that could be the way it was, especially right next to China with Chinese workers in Central Asia who would have just been possibly had gone for the New Year's festival, which had been canceled. And so I kind of wondered if some officials didn't want to bring it up because they were afraid it would make China mad. If they said Chinese workers, or that had brought it into the country, or that their own people who had been visiting China or had been dealing with Chinese companies had contracted the virus through that way. It was very interesting that they waited until they could say that these cases were coming from somewhere else, either the West, as you said, or the Middle East, in the case of Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan recently, too, where these people had come back from Umrah. And again, I don't want to pick on Kazakhstan, but if you remember, they had an official that came up on the 9th of March, I think, and said he expected the first cases might be announced between the 11th and 16th of March. And I'm like, who does that, in advance and says, well,
only in Kazakhstan.
Maybe, So, you could see they were kind of, at least in Kazakhstan, they were controlling access to information and exactly when it would be released. Yeah. So that's troublesome. It's ridiculous to play the blame game. It's a global pandemic. Right. It doesn't matter where it came from. The fact is everyone has it. But I agree that it's very interesting that the Central Asian governments have been very careful not to connect the virus with China, at least as it is on their territories.
Very interesting.
Can I jump in here quickly?
Yeah, sure.
I just found one interesting article with the quote from the Director General of one of the private laboratories in Kazakhstan, and he actually said 6 days ago that some group of people may have already got this infection before, but because we didn't have the test system, we couldn't really know if they were infected or not. So maybe this is one of the problems as well. Maybe in the beginning of the outbreak, when it started all over the world, in Central Asia, there were not enough tests, because just recently they started to say about this test that they ordered from several partners. One of them is China. But before, nobody really knew how they actually know that the person is infected with a novel coronavirus. So and when on the March of 9th, the first infected plane arrived, it was a chief sanitary doctor who said that he will predict that finally coronavirus will come to Kazakhstan. And he actually resigned a few days ago, and we have a female chief sanitary doctor.
Very interesting. We have to also conclude the discussion here very quickly, but just final 1 or 2 points here. Now we are, of course, everyone is busy. Journalists are busy reporting about this, and governments are busy to cope with the situation. But there is a day when we will face post-coronavirus. Is there anyone talking about that? I mean, what they are thinking about, what are the plans in place to handle the post-coronavirus period when lots of people will be unemployed, economy will be shattered? Is there anyone even talking about that? Bruce?
This is tough to say. Kazakhstan seems to be the only one that's been trying to look past this. And they have, besides the coronavirus, they also have a huge problem with their economy because of oil exports. I see that they're looking beyond that, but I think the other countries, at least where they admit they have it, meaning Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, are more concerned, rightly so, I would say, with trying to take care of this right now. Put out the fire that they have right now before you start looking down the road. Because it really, I think Shirin was right. This is only the very beginning of this, and we've seen countries where they announce they have 2 cases or 4 cases, and within 10 to 14 days they have thousands. So I would say that they're probably better off. You hope the day will come very soon where this won't be a problem. The coronavirus won't be a problem. But I think that has to be all of your attention should be on that right now, and keeping your people safe and healthy, isolating pockets where it breaks out, and like I said, getting everyone back to good health, and then you can worry about bringing back your economy and what you're going to do about the unemployed. There have to be programs for people, certainly, so they can get food, and while they're unemployed, they don't lose their flats. They have electricity, things like that. And I think most governments in Central Asia, well, certainly Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, have taken measures so that the most vulnerable segments of their population won't be cut off entirely during the course of this virus.
Okay, terrific. Just the last point maybe then, Shirin, going forward, what you will be looking at to understand where we are going with this?
Currently, it looks, and maybe it just looks like it, but it's not, out of control yet. However, we have a lot of our citizens are living and working in Russia as migrant workers, and our economy and Russia's economy are very closely tied, and what's going on in Russia is affecting everything that's happening in Kyrgyzstan. Except for the coronavirus, we also have issues with the currency rates, and generally, Kyrgyzstan is a very poor country, a developing economy, and for a lot of people, even if the curfew is imposed and prolonged, even after a week, they will be left without food and without jobs. And right now, we're all sitting at home with our kids in self-isolation. I think we will need to, if, this happens to be a very serious kind of situation with lots of deaths and lots of critical cases, I think we'll have to start at zero again, because we will have to rebuild our economy and our society, and this all needs to be done trusting our government and not being punished by the government for making the picture of of their work related to the coronavirus look bad. This is not what anyone wants, but we do want some guarantees that the government is on our side, and the money that they have received. We have very high level of corruption, and $121 million can, change everything in this country. But is it going to be used for essential needs, or is it going to be stolen by the people in power again?
Very thoughtful. Thank you very much, Shirin Aitmatova, the leader of Ummad 2020 People's Movement and formerly member of the Kyrgyz Parliament. With this, we are ending the discussion here. And also, big thanks goes to Aygrim Tulukhan, Almaty correspondent for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties Kazakh service, Radio Azatik, Nikita Makarenko, correspondent of the local newspaper Gazeta Uz, who was joining us from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owazi. Thank you, colleagues, for your time today. And this is it from me, Muhammad Tahir, RFL's media manager and host of the Majlis podcast. As usual, I like to say join us next week. Given the uncertainty, we don't know if we will be able to do the podcast next week. So please keep eye on our Majlis podcast Twitter feed. With this, please stay safe and thank you for joining and listening to us. For now, bye-bye.